Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it another minute or so. I see people are still logging in, and then we'll get started. Good morning to our live viewers across the Asia-Pacific region, and if you're listening to this as a recording, welcome to you wherever and whenever you are. I'm Josh Melman from the Nuix marketing team, and our topic today is defeating encryption and password protection using Nuix Workstation. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started. Please view this webinar in full screen mode so that you can see our slides and screen share the right size and you can easily read them. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please use the Ask a Question tab. We'll have some time for questions and answers at the end of the webinar. Although if anything really important comes up during the presentation, I may interrupt. And this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available using the same URL that you used to join us today. You can watch it at your leisure or share it with a colleague. Our presenter today is Robert O'Leary, who's the Head of Investigations, US Government and Corporate at Nuix. Over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Josh. As Josh had said, I am the Head of Investigations for Nuix, U.S. Government and Corporate. But by way of background, I'll give a little introduction. I started my career with the New Jersey State Police as a trooper, moved on to detective, and I started the high-tech crime unit, one of the first statewide high-tech crime units in the United States. While I was there, I supervised the first computer crimes task force, and I also supervised the forensics unit and the investigations teams. After I retired from the New Jersey State Police, I moved on to a role with the National Institute of Justice here in the U.S. as an agency within the Department of Justice, and I was the director of the Electronic Crime Technology Center of Excellence. Primarily there, we did tool testing and evaluation. We also developed training and conducted the needs assessment surveys for the National Institute of Justice, particularly for state and local law enforcement to investigate and forensically examine digital evidence. After my career with the National Institute of Justice, I served as the Director of Professional Services for an international company and then came to Nuix about 6 years ago now. For today's presentation, the learning objectives are basically understanding the value of accessing password-protected and encrypted data within your data sets, and then also understanding some of the workflows to defeating that password protection and encryption within the Nuix Workstation and in Nuix Imager to avoid the need to export that data out of your case, import it into another tool, and then re-import the results back into Nuix Workstation. Some of the most important things to understand with password protection is that it is a security process used to protect information and restrict access, whereas password protection allows only those with access to the password will access the information. Conversely, encryption is the process of actually converting that data to an unrecognizable or unreadable form, and it's to protect information so that only authorized people with authorization can view it. Files, folders, or entire volumes can be encrypted. We've seen this with BitLocker, things like TrueCrypt, the various other volume and full disk encryption products that are available. And an encrypted file will appear to be scrambled if you try to view it in its hexadecimal or through a forensic tool or any other method. It must be decrypted in order to make it human readable or understandable. So it's very important to understand the value of getting to that data. One other point, and we'll cover it here in the presentation as well as the demonstration that'll follow, is that most of the encryption tools can be decrypted with either a key or a passphrase. So we'll use both, and you'll be able to see that. The value of defeating encryption and password protection impacts all areas of electronically stored information or electronically stored data. E-discovery, cybersecurity, investigations and incident response, as well as risk management. So in order to actually understand the data that's in those data sets, the information that's in there, we need to understand how we can access it if it's password protected or encrypted. Some of the things to keep in mind are potential passwords in plain view, and these can be files on a computer, they could be files on a USB device, they could be notes on a desk even. Files on a phone can be extremely important. And also what we consider pocket litter, so to speak. So it's information that may be just in somebody's wallet or in a document or a piece of paper they carry around with them. So any of these things can be used, can contain a password or information that you need to access that password protected or encrypted data. Some of the things that we recommend is being able to scan those papers or take a photo, and then we can add that to the case and OCR it. And we've had a great deal of success even taking photos of screens on a cell phone. If we can't actually grab the phone or take the phone, we can take a picture of the screen, and we're able to enter that picture into ingest that picture into the Nuix case and OCR it. And we've had a great deal of success doing that. Some of the things I'd like to go through initially is understanding how we can use Nuix Imager and the decryption capability in Nuix Imager for an early case assessment into the data and understand whether or not there may be password protected or encrypted items in there and whether or not we're able to defeat it. So in this case, I can add evidence into the case, but before I do, I can simply go to the global options in Nuix Imager, and down below here in the global options, we can see that we have the ability to manage word lists. And in this particular instance, I have multiple word lists available to me, so I can employ a word list for my BitLockered image that I want to take a look at and see whether or not the key or the passphrase actually works to decrypt it before I process the entire thing in Workstation. So I can simply select Add Evidence and Add File, and when I do that, I'll navigate to a BitLockered image. Here I've got a BitLockered image from a laptop computer. I can add that in as a evidence file, and when I do the word list that I selected in my global options actually contains the decryption key for this particular BitLockered image, and you can see that when I process it in Imager, it's going to show me the contents of the entire volume. And now I can also go through and actually do a preliminary assessment on the contents of that encrypted volume, so I can see what types of data is in there. Looking at decryption in Nuix Workstation is very similar. What this allows me to do is select evidence and add it to my case. So as I go through this case, and actually I'm going to do this, these steps, I'm going to add evidence in here, including that BitLockered image that I looked at in Imager. And I can also go through and pre-filter. And as I pre-filter, you'll notice that next to some of these items, as I expand out the directory structure, you'll see a lock. And that lock is indicating to us that it's password protected or encrypted. So we know that we have password protected items in this case. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and select these items, process them, and now you can see that I can select metadata profiles to be able to more closely examine the metadata around those items that are encrypted or password protected. Here I can start to go through, and when I use that metadata profile, I can see whether or not the item is encrypted and whether or not it's been decrypted yet. And I can also navigate to looking at those encrypted items in my irregular items filter. So when I narrow it down very closely, I can see here that I've got a category for encrypted items, and I could select them and process it now. However, there's a step that I recommend in this workflow that you perform before you just go into decrypting, and that would be to understand whether or not there are any non-searchable PDFs or unreadable PDFs that haven't been indexed yet. And in this particular case that we're going to look at, I believe it's 8. It's very small there, but I believe it's 8 items. One of the things that I recommend is the first thing we do is OCR these. So we can simply select these items, right-click on them, and perform OCR. And when we perform OCR, what Nuix is going to do is perform optical character recognition, index these items, and then add the contents of those items that were rendered searchable and indexed, add them into the indexes that were initially created in this case. So we're going to enrich our case. And now what we're able to do is select in the results pane, we can select all of the words that were indexed when we processed this case and when we OCR'd those non-searchable PDFs. When we look at all of those words, you'll notice in the lower right corner of the results pane, we have an export option. So we're going to select the export option, and what that allows us to do is export a CSV, or a comma separated value spreadsheet, basically, with all of the words and the number of instances that those words were discovered when the data was indexed. The next thing I'm going to do is open up that CSV, those exported words, and all I need to do is copy out the left column. I only want all of the words. So I can highlight that column of words, and I can copy it, and then I'm going to paste it into a text file. And when I paste it into a text file, what I'm going to have is, as you see here in this pane, I'm going to have a text file of all the words in this case. The reason that we're going to do this is we're going to use these words initially to reprocess those encrypted items and reload them from source using these words that were indexed in this data set, based on the theory that 85% of the time you'll have the password within the data set. It's a matter of identifying it and locating it. This is particularly valuable if you get the individual's computer, you have file shares, and you have a cell phone or a mobile device or some other device that may have the passwords stored separately from the computer. So now you can see that we're going to reprocess those encrypted items. We're going to close the tabs, add them back into the case. And you'll see that we've imported all 114,000 words into the word list. We're going to leverage that word list now to defeat the encryption or password protection. And you'll notice as you go through, we're going to go through that data. We're going to start identifying documents or password protected items in the data set that we have the password for. And now it's going to add them back into the case. And if we select a metadata profile that allows us to look at encrypted items, decrypted items, and the password used to decrypt it, you'll see that we're able to list those out. And I'm going to take you through all of this in a live demo at the end of this presentation, but I wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at. One other thing that I wanted you to be aware of is we do have a document that we wrote a couple of years ago now, but it's basically early case assessment of encrypted drives and image in Nuix Imager and processing encrypted drives and images in Workstation. So these steps have also been documented in a Nuix publication that is available. You can let us know if you'd like to see that. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share now, and I'll walk us through the live presentation. Here I'm going to load up the screen share, and you can see that I've got Nuix Imager loaded up on my screen. If you'll look, you'll notice that I used the Add Evidence tab, and I've already populated this for the sake of speed, and we didn't have to navigate through and find these pieces. But if you look here, you can see that I have the BitLocker drive image, and it's a forensic container. And if we look over at the MIME type, you'll notice that on the right, Nuix identifies this as a Microsoft BitLocker encrypted volume. One of the things very valuable here in the properties, if you look, you'll see the BitLocker ID is also identified. One of the reasons this can be important is that often if the user saved off the BitLocker key, that key is often saved with an indicator that it is the key for volume ID that starts with this string of characters C2FB. So this is a random string that's generated when BitLocker encrypts the volume. But the key, when it's saved off, often I've found it saved with that string, that first string, as the identifier for what that key will decrypt. Some of the other things that we can look at here is if I look at my folder full of encrypted items, I can see here that I've got multiple encrypted items, and here the same. If I go down, you'll notice that I get MIME type is inaccessible content, but I also get the failure message that this item is encrypted. So as I go through here, I can do the exact same thing, and I can notice that there are multiple items that are encrypted in my data set. However, if I have word lists or I have lists that I believe could be valuable in identifying this, I can simply go to Global Options. And as I showed earlier, I can manage these word lists. So here I have the ability to select a word list. I can manage the word list, and here I can actually import them. So if I wanted to look at the BitLocker word list, I've got it here, and I can see that I've got the key. I've also got the password that I used when I encrypted that volume. The other thing I could do is import words. So if I wanted to import a new word list, I could simply go to, let me see, I'll go to the actual case that I have here. And I can go in here and grab this list. And I've imported these 13 words. So I can now add this as my A list. And now I can use this as my list. So I can apply that list, and now when I select that, it's one of my options as what word lists I want to use. So you can actually generate lists that you can now manage and which lists you want to apply. You can also merge those lists or combine them. One of the other options we have, and I'll show you in Workstation, is where we can import all of the words in a case. In the example that I showed you in the PowerPoint presentation, it was 114,000, I believe, 601 words. We can also ingest those as well. So now that I have them, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go through, and it is a very quick process, but I've already got it done. So I'm going to take you through the same data. What you will have to do is remove it from your case and then reload it, but reload it with the word list applied. So here, when we go into those global options and I have those that A list generated, I can now go through here, and when I add these items in here, it's still going to tell me in the metadata that this is a disk image and it's a BitLockered image, but I've now decrypted it. So now I can go through and see all of the data that's in here. So I can see I can actually navigate through the items in this data set or in this directory structure, and I'm able to see all of the information that's in here and begin to explore it more closely. Some of the other things that we're able to do is look at the other data that's in here and make a decision or an early case assessment as to whether or not the preview tells us whether or not this data is worth processing right away, or we can prioritize it in our overall caseload to make a determination as to which would be the highest priority of data to go through. So now when we go through, I can see, actually, if I select an item, I'm able to view the contents of it as well. The other thing I could do is make a determination, as I said, what data I want to look at. One of the other things I can do in here is actually start to look at my data in my case. And in this particular case, what I'm going to do is open up Workstation, and I'm going to do the exact same steps that we looked at previously. In this case, I have that same case with multiple custodians in my case. I also added that encrypted folder. I added the password protected items folder, and I added that BitLocker image. And so here again, if I look at that BitLockered image, I can see again, the file type tells me it's an encrypted volume, and I also get the BitLocker volume ID. Again, that can be a very important string of data. If I find a BitLocker key that is identified as volume ID for that particular item, I know that I can grab that BitLocker key and use it in my word list. Some of the other things I want to make sure that we cover is that there's some data in here we can look at very quickly by going to our filtered items. And again, I look at my encrypted items, and I can also change my metadata profile here. And I've got a metadata profile that I identified as decryption tips. And the reason I use this is because I can also go through here, and you'll see that I can look down the encrypted column and see everything is encrypted and none of it's been decrypted. But if I needed to understand what other information is in here, you can see that I've got a column for the author. So for these encrypted items, I can identify the author. So if I know who the author is, or the file owner, for instance, I've got, I can look at that. I can also see the last author here. So any one of these authors could have password protected these. I may need to go to that particular individual, or I may need to go back to the company and see what passwords may have been used to encrypt their items. And I can also go through and see the parent name as well as the children name for these items, so I can see what other tips can I get out of this to understand where I would best find the potential passwords for these. So as I go through here, one of the other things I wanted to look at again was I've got the encrypted metadata profile, and you'll see that I've got similar information, but I don't have the tips in there. And that's why it's important, I believe, to use this particular view so I can see who the author is, and if I see, for instance, Matthew Gagan, and I know what passwords Matthew tends to use, or I've seen them before, or I can talk to someone that knows Matthew that may have gotten a document from him and gotten a password, we may have been able to use that same password. So again, it's tips that may get you closer to understanding where the valuable information is. Some of the other things that I wanted to show you was here, if we look at the non-searchable PDFs, again, I can simply select these. I can right-click on them, and I can select OCR. And I can perform OCR, or optical character recognition, right within the Nuix Workstation, and I'm able to decrypt these items within the Nuix Workstation. So I've got the items that are in this case, and it'll change now from, for instance, this message here that this item is encrypted to an actual content of the text once it's been once I've performed optical character recognition on it. Next thing I want to do after I've performed optical character recognition, because the words in those previously unsearchable PDFs or other documents have been now added to my index, I can add them into my index, and now I can change my view from results to my word list. And here in my word list, I've got all the words that are in my case, and I can start to look at them. And now I also have, again, the option to export them. And I can export them to a file. When I export them to a file, much like we saw here, I'm going to be able to give it a CSV. And when I give it that CSV or comma separated value, you'll see that I can go into my case here, and I've already done it. I've got my password and encrypted word list. You'll notice that I also have the all terms list, and I'll take you through that. This is going to show me all ASCII words here. Nuix also allows me to look at all the non-ASCII words, all the atypical length, and all terms in the data set. So if I were to change to that, this will render out in a few minutes here. But I've got all of the strings that are in here. So it's all terms, not just the ASCII alphanumeric characters that are in here. So I can use either one. And I've exported out those ASCII terms. And now my next step would be to go into, one of the other things I did want to point out quickly, when we process the data, you'll notice here that we've got a column for encrypted. So if I look here at the encrypted items, this is going to show me all the file types that were encrypted. So I've got 6 OLEs, I've got 5 Word documents, 2 PDFs, some spreadsheets, and that type of thing. So I've got all the data, and I know what was encrypted when I processed it, but I could also select the irregular category and now look at my encrypted items category, and I've got 18, and that matches my statistics totals. And here are all of those password protected items. So if I look at it, again, I can see that this tells me that it's an encrypted package file, and the name of the document, this is password protected. So I can go through here as well, and I can see I've got the smoking gun item. It tells me that it's an encrypted item, but I can also see who the owner is, and again, the last author, and I believe I have the owner and some other information. So again, you can still parse or glean valuable information out of this, but the easiest thing to do is select this item, these 18 items. I can right-click, and when I right-click on that, Nuix is going to give me the option to reprocess these items. So I can reload these items from source data, which basically means we're going to reload them, but we're going to select new processing options. And I'm going to leave all of my processing options the same, except for my decryption keys here. And here are my decryption keys. I'm going to select word lists. And when I go in, I'm going to add a word list, and I can import those words. And for this one, I'll import the words here from my A list, same A list I used before. And now I can import those in here and give it a name, and I'll name it again A list for this case. And now I've got those that list that I can use. So again, if I want to add that, I'm going to go ahead and process it. Now when I hit OK, it's going to go ahead and reprocess this. However, for the sake of brevity, I've gone ahead and redone it, already done it for you. And here, if we look, I've got the same view. So you can see here that I've reprocessed this. This gives me my processing settings where I reprocess those items. It'll also take me through and show me all of the encrypted and decrypted items together. Again, my statistics, if I were to look at that, I could see how many were processed. And then I could also go through and look at all of the items in my case. So now what I've got is my encrypted files metadata profile. If I look at it here, that's looking at all the data in my case, but I really only want to look at those items that were previously loaded. So now if I look at those 18, you'll see that I've got them, those decrypted items here, and I could select those. And there is one that I wanted to show you why it showed up that way. The count is different because this unnamed container was actually an immaterial item. So if I look at that immaterial item, it's actually the container for that BitLockered image. So we can explain why. When I hit hide, you'll see that the count drops down to 17, which were the total number that were decrypted. So my encrypted items were 18, which included one immaterial item, or the container. We know from our view that we're looking at the unnamed disk image was in fact decrypted, and now we can see the entire contents of it, and we're able to navigate through it. So we can see all of those items here that are decrypted, and now our count matches up. And you'll also notice the icons here in the upper left, the navigator pane, shows us that it was an encrypted item with the lock. It also shows us that there's an unlocked icon, which tells us the item was initially encrypted but decrypted with the supplied keys. So the BitLocker key that I added to the word list was used to decrypt it. If I go through here again, I can start to see what password was used to decrypt these items. And the reason this is valuable is I can export these out again and add them to my global password list. So I'm able to take this data and now look at it and maintain a global list or a list of successful used passwords, particularly if I'm working in a corporate or agency environment where perhaps maybe the documents are often used or passed around and the password is shared. The other thing that's important to understand is when we look at things like, I'm going to go back to that decryption keys password, I can see who the owner was, but just as important, I can see who this was in the possession of. So I could see the parent name, but also who had possession of it. So it may be important to look at not only who the author was, but also the file owner. So I could see that file owner category if they're in there as well. So I'm able to go through that and start to look at those valuable pieces of information. And now you can see that I've decrypted these items, and I could see the content within my case. The other thing that I wanted to show you was if we noticed, or if you noticed previously, when this item was encrypted, it was just the smoking gun document, and we can see the test of it, the text now. It just says the smoking gun, but if we look, we'll also see that there was a unnamed image in this particular document. If we look at the image tab, we can see that it actually did, in fact, contain a picture of a gun that appears to have smoke coming out of it. So we'll get all of the data out of it, as well as the understand the passwords that were used to password protect it. Now, one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that this was all generated information, so the passwords obviously were not necessarily that complex or that difficult to guess, and some were very fundamental or rudimentary. But the actual processing time is extremely fast using the Nuix workers to be able to go through and index and password or defeat the password protection on this very small subset of items within this data set. So let me see if we have some, okay, I think we have some questions that came in from the audience. Josh?
Actually, I had a question first. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, please submit it in the questions tab. But in the meantime, when you're decrypting files based on a word list, are you basically brute forcing them, so trying each one until you get one that works?
Essentially, that's what it is. It's a dictionary attack or a dictionary process. So we've got a list of words, and yes, Nuix is going to try each of the words in that list against the password or encrypted file until it works. As soon as it does, it moves on to the next one.
And that's still pretty quick, even if you have 100,000 words to try?
Yeah, actually it is. As a matter of fact, we have a little bit of time, and while we're talking, I think what I'll do is go ahead and take us over to the word list that we used. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and here we've got these 18 items, and we'll let this run while we start looking at some of the other questions that we may have had. So if we look at this, we're going to see that I'm pretty sure I set that up correctly. Nuix is now going to reprocess these 18 items that are currently password protected in the pre-decryption case that I started with.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just see here. The next, how common are encrypted files and drives and data sets that we see today? Actually, we're starting to see a great deal more encryption in files, particularly email attachments. One of the things I do like about finding them that way, one thing that Nuix does extremely well is being able to process data from multiple sources. So as we process data from those multiple sources, we find that there may be an email with an encrypted attachment to it, but the password is then sent using another method of communication, maybe a phone, a message over your cell phone, could be a Teams message, Skype message. We'll process all of those. I've got a really cool case where we start to look at communication across 4 phones. And when we look at that, we're able to start to see all the communications. Now, when we timeline it, we may see that email with the attachment, and then we see a text message very quickly after that contains simply a single word, or it may even say as explicit the password is, and then there's a term in there. So we can start to look at that data as well. So it can be very valuable for us to be able to look at all of those sources of information and be able to glean that data out of there. Let's see, I think we have some more questions that have come in from the audience. Is there a password dictionary available to use? Generally, it's a good question. There is. What we recommend is, though, you can customize that password list from the items within your case. So using these workflow steps, and they're outlined in the document that I had referenced in my PowerPoint presentation, we can get you that. It's probably more advantageous to use all the words within the case and perhaps augment them with passwords that you have known to be successful, particularly in a corporate or agency environment that may have used the same password as the document was shared among a team of people. When next question that came in is, when documents are decrypted, do the original encrypted files become the parents of the decrypted files? That's actually a good question too. As we go back to this, let me show you in this case, and I like to show it this way because it can be really interesting to see. You'll notice that if I select these 2 categories for encrypted and decrypted, we maintain the encrypted version of that document within the case. So here, when I sort on the name, you'll see that I get 2 copies of each of them, and when I look where they came from, one came out of the encrypted category and one came out of the decrypted. So basically what we're doing is keeping your data set the same as it was. We're maintaining the integrity. However, for the Nuix case, we're augmenting that with the decrypted version of that file. So while this doesn't go back into your EO1 or your 81 or your MFS01, the Nuix forensic container, the decrypted version doesn't go back into your evidence. For the purposes of your case, we've maintained the integrity of that original evidence, but we've augmented your case by adding the decrypted version into your Nuix case. So you can see here we've got 2 versions of, for instance, this PowerPoint, and the password was QWERTY. So if we look at where that came from, we know that came out of the decrypted category. This version of that same document came out of the encrypted version, the encrypted category. So this was the original that was in your forensic container, and the second was the version that we augmented your case with. Okay, Any other questions? Anything else that you'd like me to cover? All right, let me see if we've got any other questions that came in while I was talking. I did get a question previously. How robust is Nuix decryption when compared to passware? Candidly, I don't own password. I don't have it. But frankly, the workflow, I think, for me, as a forensic examiner and having been in the field, I like the capability to work within a single platform and not have to export my data out to use it in another tool and then re-ingest it back into my case. You know, I obviously, as diligent as we all try to be, there's always an opportunity for error or mistake being made there by transferring data in and out of a tool or from one tool to another. I think one of the best scenarios for me, in my experience, is being able to decrypt these within a single platform here, the Nuix platform, and be able to keep all my data in a single place and all my files within that without having to export them out and explain basically, you know, often if you've had to testify in court or write that report, you know, you can obviously find that sometimes it can be difficult to have lay people or people that aren't necessarily as technologically adept as most of the forensic examiners. It might be a little more challenging to explain to them. If I can explain to them that everything was done right within this tool and it's built-in feature and functionality, it's obviously much easier in the explanation and reporting processes. Okay, so we had another question came in. After a document has been decrypted, what would you recommend as the workflow for not exporting the original encrypted files? Oh, very good question. If I don't want to export those original encrypted, I can simply select the decrypted category here. If you look at my my case here, I can select that decrypted category, grab just those decrypted versions of those same documents. And you can see now I've deduplicated them essentially by unchecking the encrypted, and now simply use the export capability, and I have the ability to export these items, or I can export them out as a logical image. The other thing I can do is export them as a case subset. The value in case subsetting, particularly, this is a feature of Nuix that I really love because I've had to do it. I've had cases where privilege was asserted, and so therefore the examiner can't look at certain items within that because otherwise it may prejudice them. So we need to subset it. So often we've been able to use Nuix to identify anything that was fell under privilege, whether it was clergy, attorney, spousal privilege, any other privilege that could be asserted. And we can subset, we can process the entire thing, exclude those privilege items, and subset the remainder so that the ultimate forensic examiner, reviewer, or anyone else that needs access to that doesn't ever see that privileged information because it's been excluded out, and then the case was subsetted to only include those items that were not subject to privilege. So it gives us a couple different items, a couple different options, but and basically, to answer your question, I would select the decrypted items only, and then export them out of the case if you needed to add them to another matter. So I can mark that one as answered, and I think that covers everything that we had so far. If for some reason I overlooked or I missed any of the questions, please let us know through Nuix Marketing, or you can get in touch with me and I'll follow up with you. Also, there will be a recording of this presentation if you'd like to review it or share it with your friends.
Terrific, thank you, Bob. If you loved this webinar or you hated it, please leave us feedback in the feedback section on your screen. This helps us improve our webinars and better target them in the future. coming up soon, we have a couple of great power user webinars for Nuix Discover. So one is on using dashboards for greater efficiency, and one is on best practices for Nuix Discover ingestions. Those are coming up in the next few weeks, and you can sign up for those in the Nuix channel on BrightTalk, and there are links to those in the attachments and links section of the screen. Also coming up, we have a webinar on the Faces of Innovation report, which was produced by Nuix and Ari Kaplan Advisors. And this is a webinar will discuss the implications for law firms in the Asia Pacific region of trends uncovered in the Faces of Innovation report, which is all about using knowledge management in your legal and discovery practices. All right, and with that, I think we will call the webinar to a close. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Josh.